Miss April McLennan this afternoon in our church to give us a talk about a sensitive topic, which is trauma and abuse. Mrs. April McLennan has been a public servant for the communities of Miami-Dade County and Broward County for the past 33 years. Don't try to guess her age. Mrs. McLennan has worked for the Miami-Dade State Attorney Office in various positions and in different units in that office. She has worked in the juvenile unit, was a supervisor for several years in both the domestic crimes unit and the sexual battery unit. She now holds the position of victim advocate, where she assists victims of sexual battery. During her tenure at the State Attorney's Office, Mrs. McLennan received a master's in counseling and psychology from Trinity University. She has volunteered and conducted training in Miami-Dade and Broward counties. These include agencies such as Safe Space Shelter in Miami-Dade, the Miami-Jackson Rape Treatment Center, and the Urban League of Broward County. Most recently, Ms. McLennan has been working with Smith Community Mental Health Center with individuals and families by providing behavioral health services to help preserve human dignity. Help me welcome Mrs. McLennan.
Thank you so much, Doctor. It's an honor and pleasure to be here this afternoon with you all. This is a very sensitive topic, but it's also a very close topic to my heart. But while we're here this afternoon, even though this is a serious topic, I want us to be talk to me. I don't want to be here just to lecture, but also I want us to be just have a conversation about what we're going to go over this afternoon, okay? And think in your mind, at the end of this presentation, there will be a time for questions, and hopefully I'll have the answers. But my question to the church is, what do you all do, or what should the church be doing about domestic violence? Okay, so that's just something to think about as well. So we're going to start off with what is trauma? Trauma, a powerful emotion response to a distressing event, such as war, an accident, the unexpected loss of a loved one, abuse. Trauma can continue to cause both emotional and physical symptoms for many years after the event has concluded. Now, there are so many different types of trauma, okay? The traumatic experience can be unexpected. The victim has experienced past traumas. The experience happened repeatedly or over a prolonged period of time. Trauma can occur during childhood. It can occur during our adult stage of life as well. Feeling of helplessness during the experience, that's what some of the victims may feel. Victims also are dealing with major stressors and unrelated to trauma. So, what do we do about that? Just think about it. Going through our lifetime, can anyone say that they have lived at the age that they are and not occurred or experienced any trauma? I can't say that. I think about my childhood, and there was lots of periods of trauma. So just take your time and think about, if you have been through a traumatic experience, what about your brothers and sisters? What about your co-workers in the community? A lot of times, even through what we have been experienced through COVID, a lot of times that has expounded people with their traumatic experience being isolated and not having their circle or their social group to connect with and share their experience with. But there's one particular type of trauma that Doctor wanted me to talk about, and that is domestic violence. But before we go to that, there's so many types of trauma. Like, again, we went over childhood. I spoke about that. kids being bullied in school. Now, when you watch the news, there are so many incidents of fights going on in school. This will make a kid have some traumatic experience. Worry about, mom, dad, do I have to go to school tomorrow when a fight just happened, when there was guns being brought to school? That can bring on traumatic experience for a student as well. What about an accident? Some clients that I have, sometime they're in an accident or something happened where someone dies by a car accident, and they have a phobia of driving again or even riding in a car. That can cause trauma, and that can cause mental distress as well. Poverty, it hits us all. Racism, and also, again, violence in the community, war, terrorism. What's going on in our across the world right now. People are protesting, they feel like their rights are being cut, or in places where there is war. All of this is traumatic experience. So, like I said, one important trauma that the doctor wanted me to really focus on this afternoon is domestic violence. Now, there's the statute, there's information, but what is domestic violence? Domestic violence is a pattern of controlling behavior by one person who has or has had a personal, intimate, or family relationship with one another. Domestic violence may include making threats, slapping, choking, pushing, kicking, forcing, or pressuring an individual for sex when they do not want to, or any type of unwanted behavior. Domestic violence can happen to anyone regardless of religion, social, economic, ethnic, and educational background. Domestic violence happens to individuals of all age and in every community. So please keep that in mind. Someone can look one way on the outside, but he or she can be having a hurricane and suffering from a tremendous amount of domestic violence inside. So just always keep that in mind. So that's the Florida statute, 741.21, and it defines it as a family or household member, spouses, former spouse, a person related by blood or marriage, a person who are presenting, residing together as if a family, or who have resided together in the past as a family, a person who are parents, they have a child in common, so they don't have to be married, but this can also be a part of domestic violence. So, some shocking stats. 1 in 10 victims of intimate partner homicide were reported to have an experience with violence, and also preceding in death. Now, another shocking incident is women who are pregnant. That is a significant time that they can be killed by their partner. So we really have to take in consideration why. What is this? What is the solution? We are the church. What is the solution? Where is the love that we are supposed to lead with? That's the question. Being a Christian, I'm always asking myself that as well. What is the solution to stop domestic violence? So the cycle of violence. Now, I have presented, I hope you all have your folders, and we have the information. It's a pamphlet, and it talks again in more detail about what is domestic violence. So here we have information about the cycle of violence. You have tension building, physical occurs, and then you have your honeymoon stage. Have anyone heard of that word, the honeymoon stage? Yeah, okay. So next slide. So tension build. what do you think happens? You know, sometimes someone will come home, and please forgive me, I'm going to mention the batterer mostly as males because 90% of the time of the cases that we do have or that I see, the defendants are males, okay? So what happens? One incident could be that the gentleman comes home, he's upset, had a stressful day, really doesn't know about conflict resolution, and upset because the food is not cooked the way he wants to. So what happens? That's when the tension builds. And that's when he'll have an, yell, argument. Maybe the wife is not taking that day, and there we go, that tension building. Or sometimes she may feel like, oh my goodness, I have to walk on eggshells. I do not know what is going to set him off. So sometime you may hear that. I have stories of that's how it started, just with some tension building. Then use of violence. This is when a major act of violence occurred, including physical or sexual assault, threats to harm, as well as verbal abuse. Please take note, verbal abuse is just as serious as physical abuse. This is something that can break down, as we know, our spirit man. So that's why it's really important, and we'll talk about self-help and therapy. You have to know your image and who you are created. You are created in whose image? Amen. So we have to remember, and we have to share that knowledge, that when someone is verbally abusing another person, it could be bullied in school, it could be even coworkers, it could be in a relationship, but we have to make sure that we carry the word, carry the light, and know who we are. So that's why we have to make sure as Christians, or just as someone who knows who are you, you're not going to believe the enemy's account of you. So when something negative come in and someone is talking and using verbal abuse, we have to cut it out right then and there. You do not have to accept that type of behavior. So in this phase, the injury may occur and the police may be called. This is the way that we can start having the cycle of domestic violence end. We need to reach out and let someone know that's what's going on. We know that there's shame. People feel like, maybe they feel like they are alone, but they're not alone. If we know what's going on, or if we think, and we'll show, there will be a slide about the warning signs or something that you may look and you can question. So you need to reach out to your brothers and sisters and ask them, is something going on? And don't be ashamed to ask, okay? So then after the acts of violence, and then there's the honeymoon stage. Oh, the abuser will be like, I'm sorry, I apologize, please forgive me. Shower the person with gifts. They may shower the victim with flowers. They intentionally are, quote unquote, can be very kind during that stage because they know that something has happened, and this is the critical point that the victim may say, you know what, I'm not going to take it anymore. But if this does not happen, the cycle can continue and continue and continue, and unfortunately it can continue, which lead into a homicide. Okay? So the warning signs of domestic violence: unexplained injuries, extreme jealousy or control. Sometimes someone who is low self-esteem may feel like, oh my goodness, he always want to know where I'm at. She always want to check in on me. No. That could be a sign of jealousy and control. Please understand and know the difference, okay? Threats, forced sex, destroying your property, harm to pets. Now, does anyone think about that? That's how it could start, with harming an innocent pet, and then it can lead to a person. So yes, if someone is harming a pet intentionally, yeah, we need to take note. Economic control, repeated contact, again, control over where are you, what's going on, text messages, phone call, isolation from family and friends, refusing, first of all, to allow you to go and hang out or meet or be with your family or friends, but also not wanting to meet them as well. Why don't you want to meet my family? If you're interested in me, if you love me, respect me, why not want to be introduced to my family, and vice versa? Where are your friends? Why are you always isolated and alone? Where is your family? So these are signs, red flags to think about when we're talking, or if someone's single out there, starting a relationship. These are some red flags we need to look at and take note. Take away or threaten to take kids away, and extreme anger. We have to understand that in South Florida, we live in a melting pot. There's so many different cultures here in South Florida, all the way down to Miami and Key West. So when some people come to South Florida, they bring what? Their background cultures, right? Their ideas, their mentality. Do you think if a woman who is from another country where the men are in charge, the men have the voice, the men have the say, so if an incident happened in that country, who are they going to believe? Most likely the man. So if the woman comes here with that same husband, they have that same culture, identity, that same background, do you think if something happens here in the household that she's going to call the police? More than likely not, because she's thinking, what, again, maybe she's not working, maybe the husband is working, maybe they're applying for their visa, green card, what have you. So where's she going to go? If she doesn't know that she has the resources or that someone's out there to assist her, she may feel like I have no one. I'm isolated from my family, I have no monies, maybe she didn't go to school, and of course, what's the next thing? The language barrier. So there is a lot of different factors that people from other countries sometimes are battling when they're also going with battles at home as well. So why do victims stay in relationships? We're going to see a short clip, and I'll be back.
Question. If a stranger, someone you did not know, punched you and then strangled you nearly unconscious and then walked away, what would you do next? How would you react? I asked that question to jury panels during jury selection of trials sometimes, and one time I asked it and an older woman stood right here in the front row, looked at me and said, well, I would cry. And I thought, well, shoot, that's maybe the best answer I've ever heard to that question. But after you cry, what would you do next? And I think most of us would take out our phones and we would call 911 and report the attack to police. And we would do so with the hope and the expectation that the police would go find that person that attacked us, arrest them, and prosecute them. I doubt that any of us would call the police and then when they get there, lie to them about what happened or try to conceal evidence of what happened in an attempt to protect the stranger that attacked us, because that would be irrational. That would be unreasonable. But let me ask you a couple of different questions. What if the person that attacked you was not a stranger? What if it was a member of your family? Someone you loved? Would that change how you react or how eager you are to report that to authorities? What if you believed that if anything bad happened to your attacker, you might not be able to pay your mortgage or provide for your children? What if you believed that if you cooperated with authorities, you might be killed or your children could be harmed? if any of you think about those circumstances and you think that you would react differently or you would hesitate to cooperate with authorities if they came or even call them in the first place, I doubt that you consider yourselves unintelligent or irrational. But if you put all of those factors together, you get a glimpse at the world in which victims of domestic violence live every single day. And it is precisely that, unintelligent and irrational, that victims of domestic violence are often dismissed as in our culture. Let me give you an example. How many times have we heard the question of victims of domestic violence, why didn't she just leave? What's wrong with her that she would stay with a man that abuses her? We hear that all the time, don't we? And it's an easy judgment to make because from most of our perspectives, the act of staying with someone who abuses us, who is dangerous to us, who tortures us, who physically harms us, and even trying to protect them makes no sense. It's irrational from most of our perspectives. And so we fall into the trap of judging victims. I've been guilty of it myself. I remember fairly early in my career I had a case where a guy set his wife on fire. And I was prosecuting that case, and I met with the victim months after the attack. She was horribly, permanently injured over nothing because she spent.
So that's just a little clip of one TED Talk about domestic violence. But what it is about the question of why do women stay? Why do victims stay in this type of relationship? And it's because, what? Fear. They fear of what will happen if I leave. Will he come after me? Will his family find me? Will he hurt my kids? Will he hurt my family? Because there are lots of threats. The defendants would say, if you leave, I'm going to track down your family, I'm going to show up at your job, and I'm going to hurt and kill everyone there. This is nothing lightly to play with. So when someone is debating and thinking about leaving, this is the most crucial time that they have to deal with. They have to take in consideration their families, their kids, and also themselves, their coworkers, their neighbors even, you know. So also, wonder if the person is not working. Wonder if they, again, are here for their papers and in a relationship, and I'm married, how I'm going to get out, how I'm going to fend for myself. So it's a lot of times that they do not want to leave or think they cannot leave. But there's hope. There are so many resources out there for victims of domestic violence. And the one thing that I do appreciate coming and speaking and doing outreach in the community is to let, maybe it's not for you. Maybe the information is not for you, but the information can be for someone else that you may know. It may be for your neighbor. It may be for the cashier at the grocery store. You notice that she has an injury on her eye, and last week she was okay. You know, it could be for the doctors who are working at the hospital or the nurses. A victim come in, oh, I fell down. You fell down? Oh, like, okay, let's be curious about it. What happened? And then that's when we can find out a little bit more. So the resources, number one, call 911. Make a police report. There are quite a few shelters out in from Miami, Key West to West Palm Beach. The information I put in your folders as well. Someone can go and apply for an injunction or restraining order, if you may heard it by that name. There's a process, but that is very good to help a woman get empowered or a victim get empowered. There are other agencies. There's the Attorney General's office in Tallahassee. If you have any medical bills relating to an incident of violence, you can apply for that program. And there's also legal and financial assistance throughout the counties as well. So before we show the video, so now after all of that, trauma, domestic violence, sexual assault, the traumatic experience that someone goes through, what's the hope? We have our churches, we have our family, we have therapy, but what is therapy? What kind of tools would they use in therapy to find out where you are and what's going on? So throughout my career, I've learned about an ACE study or an ACE questionnaire, and it talks about, your childhood. So a therapist can use this tool to find out a little bit more about her patient, and we're going to see the video now.
The term ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and these are stressful or traumatic experiences that happen in childhood that can increase the risk for significant health, mental health, and behavioral consequences later in life. They really come from a big landmark research study that was done by the CDC and Kaiser now more than 20 years ago, in which they asked adults about their history of 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences, and these include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, or growing up in a household where a parent experienced mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, where there was parental separation or divorce, or intimate partner violence. What they found was, number one, ACEs are super common, and number two, that there's this really significant effect. So there's a direct, what we call a dose-response relationship between adverse childhood experiences and some of the most significant and serious health conditions that are facing Americans today. 2/3 of individuals had experienced at least one, and 1 in 8 folks had experienced 4 or more. When we talk about how many of us have experienced ACEs, what we see is that ACEs impact every community, every demographic group, but it impacts our vulnerable communities in a disproportionate level. The big surprise about the ACE study was that for someone with 4 or more ACEs, their risk of heart disease was double, right? For stroke and cancer and liver disease and diabetes, even autoimmune disease. And a lot of these things are things that we didn't kind of traditionally or intuitively associate with childhood trauma. But now we can use this science to understand actually what happens in our brains and bodies when we're exposed to trauma or adversity, and especially in childhood. The term, the toxic stress response, actually refers to the prolonged activation of our body's stress response, the release of all those stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol and all those things that go along with our stress response. And then also the ways in which that affects our bodies. Children are especially vulnerable to this repeated activation of the stress response because their brains and bodies are just developing. So high doses of adversity in children actually changes the way their brains develop. It changes the way their hormonal systems develop, their immune system develops, and even the way their DNA is read and transcribed. And those long-term changes are what we refer to as the toxic stress response. One of the things that's really challenging about ACEs is that they tend to repeat in families, generation after generation. And I will say this as someone who has experienced my fair share of ACEs. Understanding how that might be impacting me and being able to recognize that, for me, is really the key for being able to do things differently. When we understand what happens in our bodies with the toxic stress response, and we understand that it's that prolonged activation of our stress response, then step one is really understanding what are the things that help to regulate our stress response. And immediately at that point, we begin decreasing the harm that happened as a result of our past experiences. So things like mindfulness, right? Meditation, spending time in nature, mental health interventions, regular exercise, nutritional strategies, and my favorite, healthy relationships. All of these things are really scientifically demonstrated to help to regulate the biological stress response, and they improve our outcomes for those of us who have experienced ACEs. These nurturing relationships, they feel good, which is good, of course, but they literally change our biology. When we have safe, stable, and nurturing relationships in our lives, it improves our neurologic functioning, it improves our hormonal regulation, it improves our immune functioning, and these social supports are critical part of healing. If we all understand our role in being a source of buffering care to a young person in need, that is truly transformative. ACEs Aware is a first-in-the-nation effort to train our healthcare providers how to screen for adverse childhood experiences and how to respond in an evidence-based, trauma-informed way that helps to improve outcomes for children and adults. ACEs are not destiny. Even if someone has experienced significant ACEs, it doesn't mean that they are absolutely going to have these negative outcomes. Recognizing our ACEs requires us to recognize our vulnerability. And that can be really scary. But it also is the place where we get a chance to ask for what we need. I deeply believe that we can cut ACEs and toxic stress by half in one generation.
Okay. So that was very, very good information.
The performance was enchanting, completely captivating on so many different levels. From the beginning.
It's okay. So a little commercial break. But I hope that you really got something from that video. So to go a little bit further, I like interactiveness. So if you can open your folder, and there is a copy of the questionnaire. Does anyone need a folder or anything? So we're not going to answer them, but in your mind you can answer them and go through them. So these are some of the questions. While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, did your parent or an adult in the household often swear at you, insult, put you down, or humiliated you? Act in a way that made you feel afraid that you might be physically hurt? Did a parent or another adult in the household often grab, push, slap, throw something at you, or injured you? You all have it? Sorry. On the exam, it says ACE exam. It's inside is some questionnaire. Okay? So just some of the questions. Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you touch or fondle? So that's one question. Another one is, how did you feel? It talks about your feelings. Did you feel special? It talks about, were your parents separated or divorced? So these are just, and also, were there weapons in the home? So these are some questions that therapists may use. This is a tool that they may use just to find out a little bit more about the client that's before them, okay? So also, the speaker, she spoke about how trauma can affect the brain. So just know that when trauma happens to a child, their brain is not developed. So that can change their the physical and their the brain and how it develops. Okay. So again, the effects of trauma have anxiety, anger, depression, shame, disassociation, feeling the pleasure, not being able to feel pleasure, lack of sleep, isolation. They may go into using drugs. They may attempt suicide, post-traumatic stress. So these are just some of the effects that trauma can have on an individual. But there's hope, like I stated. One thing is that we need to make sure that we know what happened to us. Get grounded. Stop and confess it. When we hide things inside, it cannot grow. It can't heal. So we need to confess what happened to us, but you need to make sure that you do it in a safe environment. You do it in a church with your pastor, therapy. If a child is at school with the teacher or principal, they have counselors, they need to tell their story, be able to tell their story of what happened. And then you can start the road to healing. Don't see yourself as a victim, but see yourself as a survivor. And trauma care and therapy, there is such a thing as trauma care. The therapist will help the client find coping tools. This is one part of it I love, when a client comes back and said, oh my goodness, I used XYZ on what you taught me, and I was able to succeed. There's one client I had recently, she had a phobia of flying, but with tools, working, talking, positive self-talk, and other things, she was able to get on a plane that she hasn't been able to fly in years. So was very excited for her. When a victim of domestic violence goes to a shelter, they have to leave their home, but then they rebuild their life, and you hear about it years later, oh my goodness, their physical appearance don't even look the same. It's a transformation from the inside out. So there is so much hope. Stress, they know how to regulate, they know how to deal with stress. Stress is all around us lately. It's a lot. So what do we do with it? How do we cope? How do we survive? We have to learn how to deal with stress, how to handle it. Our hormones, sometimes therapists, doctors, we have to make sure that the person, they may say, I feel this way, but you know what? It could be something physically going on as well. As people of faith, I've heard that, oh no, we can't take medication. We should not take medication. We just got to believe and pray. Okay. I'm not telling anyone, I'm not a doctor, but from personal experience, when there was a dark time in my life, I'm being transparent, I did seek my doctor and use medication for a period of time. It's just another tool, along with other tools, to help you get through a dark period of time. So, Start changing your life, changing your lifestyle. Get out of toxic relationships. Find mentors, spiritual counselors, trained professionals that can help you and lead and guide you. Eat healthy, which we're all trying to do. Meditate, but we know that we read the Word, we can meditate, we go out in nature. There's so many things that we can do to help our bodies, our mind, and our spirit man heal from our past traumas. And also on the next slide, you need to find your support group. We need to find that kitchen table and where we feel comfortable, not judge, and we need to talk about it. I remember, my older cousins, I go into my grandfather's house back in Sarasota, Palmetto, Florida, and all my family, they're at the kitchen table. They're in the kitchen, That's where we do our healing, just talking to each other. So where do you do your healing now? Is it at the hair salon? Is it the nail salon? Is it just taking your walk? Where is it? But we need to get back to the kitchen table. We need to get back to maybe even having family meals with our family. We're always saying, oh my goodness, we're so busy. How about starting back having that family time? Having that good communication, opening up, talking. Well, what's going on with you? The kids nowadays, what are they doing? What are they on? That's screen time, right? Okay, ask, be curious, what's going on? What's on the screen time? What you watching? It's something that we have to start and get back to. That kitchen table, find your support group, find your circle, okay? Grieve the loss. This is very important for victims of domestic violence. This is very important for people who were victims of sexual assault. They need to grieve the loss. Maybe grieving the loss of your innocence, your childhood. Maybe if you're a victim of domestic violence, you're grieving the loss of that relationship. You may have had to get a divorce. You may have your spouse or your partner may have gotten arrested. So the person is not in your life anymore. They're in jail. So now you have this whole process about the court system. So that's something you're grieving, the way your life was and what's going on now. But it's still on the road to recovery because it's a better situation for you and your family. It's a daily process, though. We have to read our word, what our pastors tells us to pray, to listen, journal, find that favorite spot that you need to be to rejuvenate yourself, rejuvenate your mind, rejuvenate your Holy Spirit that's in you to say, I'm on the road to recovery. And one thing I tell victims who feel so bad and so down on themselves. Why did I get myself? It's my fault. It's my fault. First of all, it's not their fault. Even if, they willingly went into the relationship, it's not your fault that someone lays their hands on you. That's not your fault. Another thing is we try to tell them, go easy on yourself. This is a learning process, and it's a daily process for you to recover and heal from your traumatic experience. It's one day at a time. That's what God gives us. Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow is not here. We only have today. So take advantage of all the resources, all the people that God have placed in your lives, and be able to find that road to recovery. Have an appreciation for the life that God has given you. Have appreciation for the life and the friends and the family members that you do have in your life. It's very important. Things are happening. We don't know when the last day that we'll be here. So take the time don't take it for granted that, I'll see you tomorrow. We don't know. Take the time to appreciate and love the ones who are in your life. It's very important to be thankful. Every time you thought you couldn't moving forward, you did. Take a moment to appreciate the strength that you have within. We do have strength. Victims of domestic violence, they may feel like they do not have any strength or hope or feel like they are alone and lost, but they do have hope and they do have strength. But sometimes they need help, and sometimes they don't want to ask for help, so we may have to be that one to initiate them to start talking. We have to be a little curious about our family and our friends and say, what's going on? I haven't heard from you. What's that injury that you have on your arm? Or what happened to you? You have to be a little curious and to ask them if they need help. So now, as I stated before the presentation, that my question is to what is a church body to do about this trauma, this domestic violence issue that's in our community? Sometimes it can be very silent, that again, you can have a neighbor and you can have a coworker and not know that the person is going through this type of situation. So what is the church to do about this? What is the church solution? Any comments? Yes, Pastor.
One of the first things is to, I think that one of the first things that we need to do is educate the church so that each member, can become something not only around this community, but around the community where they live. If we educate the church, then each member can help their family members, because there's probably abuse in most families.
Yes, I think those are great ideas. And I'm willing to help, so yes. Yeah, I'm willing to help, so let me know. Yes. But yeah, educating the community, also having support groups again, because a lot of time women don't feel, or victims, they feel like somebody's going to judge me if I tell what happened. If they know that, I went back. Okay, no judgment here. We're not perfect. We just want the person to be alive and well. And we want to help them get the resources that are available to them in the community. I always say to coworkers in the law enforcement, if I wasn't working in this arena, I probably wouldn't know how to navigate, because I'm not here. I'm not in the court system. I'm not, but to a layperson out there in the community, someone needs to go out there, Pastor, like you said, and educate them to let them know, well, this is what's here for them. Any other comments or questions?
You referred to exactly what I was going to say. Sometimes we're not aware of what these issues are. So a little history here. Coming from the Caribbean, looking at this questionnaire, probably applies. Every question probably applies. Did a parent or other adult in the household often swear at you, insult you, put you down, humiliate? Every day. Did a parent or other adult in the household often push, grab, slap, or throw? Every day. Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch you, fondle you, every day? We could go through that. So we came up on it as normal. So some of us, so we come here now and realize, it wasn't normal. Because for instance, when I got slapped and I told my wife about this, my father left my mother at 9, so she was raising 2 kids by herself in the 20s in Jamaica. And that's always the story with women. So all this pressure is on you. One of the whoopings I got with that tanned leather belt raised my skin on one of my hands by 1/2 inch. I didn't think it was bad. Because when I got to school, one of my friends, he had gotten a whooping that same weekend. He was tied up in ants' nest and then whooped with a fan belt, a radiator belt from a car. So you're speaking relatively. I didn't get anything then. So you move on thinking this is normal. But as you're saying, is later on in life, like my wife says, you always have this anger subcurrent. Where does it come from? So now you have to stop as you get older. It came from, as you said, the childhood experiences. So now in the classroom, I'm a college instructor at Palm Beach State and FAU. So you see some of these kids, like you say, today good, tomorrow it's just the same person. And then the problem you have now, especially with the administration in Florida, is you don't want to violate people's personal rights. So you notice something. Most you can say is diplomatically, especially coming out of the climate of the last 6 years or so. Is everything okay? You can go to, there are counselors here free of cost, but sometimes they snap back, I don't need help. And Labrador said this, you have people who need help, but if they refuse to admit they need help, then they can't be helped. Now, so my question to you is, what do you do in that situation?
So that's a good point. I love the history, and you're absolutely right. But one thing before I answer, because it was happening to us in our past or in our childhood, no matter where we're from, it doesn't mean that it was correct, okay? And also, it does still carry over into our adult life, and also how we do conflict resolution. We can always learn. I think I'm going to be a student, always learning for life, because from different cultures, different aspects, different people, you learn. So I think it's really important to know, maybe that's not how I was supposed to raise my kids back then, but maybe now you can help raise your grandkids in a positive way, or be a mentor to a younger person. So I do understand Caribbean background so much and so well, but it doesn't mean that it was always correct. Then moving on to, if you feel like that someone is being abused, especially if it's a minor, as citizens of your community, we are always instructed to report. You can call DCF hotline. It can be anonymously, and report it. Someone will go out to the home to make an assessment and see if there is abuse going on there. Now, your students, you and the university, if you're noticing that something's going on, and they don't want to come about, I think the one thing we should do as Christians is pray. Pray about it. You never know. God will make a way, open a door for them to respond or come back to say, you asked me last week was, if I needed help, I think I do. Or an incident will come about. Leave resource information. Have someone come in to speak about it. They may not. It takes, stats say, it takes 6 to 7 times before a woman of domestic violence will actually accept the help that is rendered to her. 6 or 7 times. So you could be that 5th person in the line. You could be the 3rd person in the line. But we never know, but we have to keep trying. We have to keep trying. Yes, ma'am?
Okay. Is it on? Okay. So I'm the wife that told him that he was, yes. And here's what I ran into, right? Because my mother-in-law is fabulous. I love her. I think she's a very kind person. But then I think about the description that he gave, and I think it's so abusive. And at the same time, I don't want to offend him by telling him, your mom abused you, okay? Your dad was wrong. Your mom was wrong. The way they handled you was wrong. But I feel like that can be I can talk to him. He's good. He'll handle it. He's got strong shoulders, right? He can deal with it. And he'll process it and come back and, respond to me later. But how how do you approach them, like friends of mine that I know, because of course being born and raised here, we have a lot of Caribbean friends, right? To not offend them, because it feels offensive to them because they love their parents and they feel their parents did the right thing by raising them that way. You know, so that's my question.
That's a very good point. And just how you did it, you're very, you know, is the way you present the comment. You're very calm. You did it with kindness and empathy, and you're letting them know that, you know what, in my culture or if in my home, this is how we did it. Can you tell me a little bit more about what happened in there? You know, and just say, oh, well, this would be considered X, Y, Z, you know, and that's it. But you're doing it with, you want to know. You're inquisitive. You want to know. You're doing it with kindness. You're doing it with love. And that's all we have to do, because listen, I'm going to learn from you, you're going to learn from me, but we have to do it openly, not close hands and already feel like, well, my culture's better or the way that I'm doing something is better. No, no, no. We all got to come together with an open heart, learning to listen, learning to grow, and learning to say, well, you know what, maybe I did make a mistake. Okay, own up to it. But now, in that same scenario, do you all have kids? Okay, so now him as a dad, you know, would be like, well, you know what, this is how I was raised, but this is how I'm going to raise my kids. You can talk to them and share them. Well, my mom did X, Y, Z, but this is how we're going to handle things in our home. And that's breaking the generation curses. That's breaking the lines of domestic violence, moving from one home, one generation to the next. It's not going to be easy, but we have to be consistent and we have to do it with love.
Just want to say something. It's not just the Caribbean culture, the Italian, the all across border. When I speak to other people from other countries, the Asians, they all, the discipline was the same. It was apparently what they knew. So it's not just the Caribbean. Right here in the South, we talk about growing up here, but right here in the South, if you talk to Drew, he'll tell you, he got whooping. Drew is a white boy born and raised here. So it is just that people somehow, back then, they thought that this was the way, the right thing. Part of it is frustration a lot of times with our kids, because with me around my grandchildren is totally different from how I would handle my children, because of course I was raised with this, you know. Now with my grandchildren I talk to them and it works, and the reason I started to talk to them, I thought about myself growing up. No matter how I know I'm going to get a whooping, if I want to do something, I'm doing it, and then worry about the whooping when I'm getting home. So that means the whooping is not going to stop them from doing stuff. So now I find that talking, reasoning with my grandchildren works better. I didn't know that when I was raising I did a little of that, but, you know, very strict. But there's something that you asked earlier about what the church can do. And that's very important, because abuse is in the church as much as it's outside. And there's not much resource in the church. I remember a few years ago, a friend of mine who was not a part of the church was threatened and beaten. I had no clue what to do because she was scared. So the first thing I did was call the pastor at the church I attended. I called him because I didn't know what to do. She's not going to report it because he's going to kill her and all kind of stuff. And he said to me, oh, I know a therapist in Coral Springs. I'm going to, get her in touch. I said, right now, she's at work and she's scared. She has a black eye and I'm describing it. And he said, oh, call the police. So I hung up because I'm talking to her and I know the fear. And I have to fear for myself too, because I found out that he has a history of going after her friends. So then you're fearing for yourself. You don't know where to go. I had no idea where to go. So the only thing I can think of, oh my goodness, I'm there planning how to help her without knowing of any resource. So I'm putting myself and my 2 children's life in danger, but I had to help her, and I found out a way. I thought I was some detective or something. I didn't want to use my phone in case he tracked my phone, so I went to a call box. I called her mom and said, listen, you can't tell her I tell you, but change your locks, change this, change that, because he's going to come back to the house. And I'm doing everything, and I am still fearful because I'm trying to get her out of the house, from work, doing all this. In the long run, it paid off because her mom went to her house and found bloody clothes, and that's how she confronted her so she could help her. And we had to move her out of the house. But what you're going through, even as the friend or the family member, your life is just as in danger as the person being abused. So having the resource and hearing pastors say educate the church, it is so needed. And I'm really happy about this because I can remember how fearful I was doing this and thinking all kind of stuff, some jungle justice and all that kind of stuff going through my head. But I am really glad for this because there are others out there, and it's not just the physical violence. Mm-hmm. You watch people that's going through stuff where they're fearful, but they don't want to go anywhere, you know, so this
they feel
is really
like they
awesome.
can't go anywhere.
Yes,
you know.
Yes.
I'm glad that you made that point because on 2 occasions that I had to help my friends leave a situation, you know, I was terrified. Even working with police officers, I mean, it's like still that situation, knowing that the person was on their way was terrifying. We had to drive far. I can't, want to disclose all the information, but it was just a terrifying situation, and it was a rush of the moment. So you have to kind of have well, what is your safety plan? What's your plan going to be if and when the person has to leave? Because that is the most dangerous time when the person decides to leave their abuser. So you have to have copies of maybe your kids' school records or identification cards in a book bag at your mother's house or at another friend's house, or leave it at work or leave it at church. Change the bank accounts. You have to start planning things gradually. Whether other person won't know what's happening, so when you do have to leave, you're out of there. You already have things in the car. You already have things set. A friend that I knew, she used to keep, literally her valuables in her trunk of her car. Because if she had to leave, she had everything there and ready to go. If you know that we say in domestic violence world that the victim is the expert of their life, because they know what's going to tip off the person. They know the person's routine. They know when to make the move. They just may not know where to go. Mm-hmm. Yes, Pastor.
I've had, 35 years of ministry, I've had to deal with this kind of stuff. And one of the things that I've had to, one of the things that I learned about, one of the things that I learned about dealing with this is at first, I had to convince the person that they were being abused. Number one. I realized that I had to convince a person that they could change their life. Because if you move too early and too much, you're putting your life in danger and you're going to be left out in the cold. Okay? You're going to be looked at as the bad guy, and even by the person you're trying to help. Okay? So this is not like, okay, I know this person is getting, beat by her husband. I'm going to go over there and get her out of the house. I'm going to put the stuff in there, boom, and we're out. No. I've learned through life is that until this person is ready to leave, they're not going to leave. Okay? So you have to be really patient with this. And you cannot expect a person to reason how you reason. They've already have created a way of reasoning. And you have to understand their way of reasoning. And they're not going to leave this abusive relationship until they are ready to leave this abusive relationship. And that's the first step. That's the first part you got to work at with a person who's in an abusive relationship. And there's other abusive. It doesn't have to be physical. When a person is being manipulated, when a person is being controlled, that's the hardest one. A lot of times they don't know it. A lot of times their kids who grow up know that their mom is being manipulated and controlled, but she doesn't realize it, and she's the only one who doesn't realize it. So the idea of helping somebody is there's a lot of steps that must be taken before you can help that person to get away from the situation.
I agree, Pastor. It's just what you describe. It's just like the crabs in a boiling water. They don't know that they're being burned or they're being cooked. So you're absolutely right. It's a delicate situation. And like I stated, too, it takes 7 times before a person may even realize, you know what, I can have a better life. I can leave him. Remember, who has power and control? It's not the victim. So he's painting a picture, the defendant or the abuser is painting a picture that everything is good. We're good. This is how a relationship is supposed to be. Their relationship, no, they're wrong. So yeah, it's going to take time for even the person to realize that they're in an abusive relationship. And then when it does happen, they're the expert to know, okay, I got to go. Pastor, help me. I got to get out. Everyone else may know. The kids, their co-workers coming to work late, having to leave, the excessive phone calls from the person. They can't even get the work done because the person keeps calling them throughout the day. I knew of someone that had to drive from her job to work with her, you know how you have the phone on? The WhatsApp, you have the video. The person, her abuser, wanted to make sure every step she was at. So he wanted to have the picture on, the video on. What is that? We knew that's not right. But she had to come to that conclusion, and you're absolutely right. It's a very delicate situation. However, again, if I can put a little note, if you know that a child is being abused, you definitely have to report that, you know. And those are effects in the home, because when the husband and wife are, you know, going through that, the kids are there, they are hearing this, and wonder if someone picks up a gun and think he's shooting at the wife and shoots the kid. You know, it affects the whole gamut of the family.
I have a big mouth. Okay. Yeah, as you said about what the church can do. I've gone through an abusive relationship, and I remember going to my church, my pastor, and I felt like there wasn't even an opening. There wasn't anything. And I think if we can, as our pastor indicate, the church being educated, you find the talents in the church or the gifted person in the church, and it's known that you have just a hotline. You have someone who is you can call. It is useful. I've grown up in the church, and I always think that was just so missing, that there wasn't that professional help you can call to. Yes, you're in the relationship, and as I said, you're trying to find the right time to come out because you're fear of maybe sometimes not even yourself. I got to the point where I wasn't afraid of myself anymore. I was like, okay, I just started putting everything in place that if I die, my kids would be all right. But I was more concerned of, because the abuser was like, I'm going to do this to myself. You know, so you're making like you want to get out, but how do I get out? because that person is going to hurt themselves. But you wish there was that forum that you could easily go to. And so you had to be going through it by yourself. Mine finally took place, as I said, I had to go outside. And when I decided to go outside, you kept yourself, again, not being educated that there was women in distress and all those things. And when I decided I was going, and, I got a call one day, where are you? Okay, I'm getting some help. I need help. Why? What's it going to do? Finally went to get the help. They went to get the help too, but it was only to show, okay, you can go, I can go too. Didn't last because you didn't get what you want to hear. But I so think and know it is needed in the church that you have a church where that professional, because, we know we need the help. But you want to know that you're not just going to get it from your friend who may be taking your side. You want to get being informed, correctly informed of how to do it, as it says, because it's not just a jump up and go. You got to start putting things together when it's not
Making
yourself,
a plan.
when your assets, all of that. So it's so, what you're doing right now, and the desire and the offer to help is so needed, because it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop.
Well, I'm going to take a quote from Robin Roberts on Good Morning America. She always said, let your mess be your message. So what's your name? You may be starting the support group right here at the church. You know what I mean? You never know. So I think it's important, and it's, I'm so glad you survived, you're out, and, thank God. Yes. Okay. Oh, no.
Around all the time.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
So, first of all, and the only reason I can recognize abuse is because I was in that situation as a child.
Right.
And so, even as a child, at that young age, I recognized right away that that was wrong. And it wasn't the way that things were supposed to be. And wanted desperately for my mom to get out of that situation. That didn't come for a while, but eventually we did, and ended up with an amazing stepfather and a really great rest of my raising, thank God. But the whole, they're not ready until they're ready. Yeah.
What's your name? I'm
Wendy.
sorry. Wendy?
Wendy. Mm-hmm.
Very nice to meet you. Let me ask you something, doula therapy. Why did you know it was wrong? How did you know it was wrong? Did you have other role models or a model of a family nearby or something? How did you know it was wrong?
I 100% know that I know because God told me so, right?
Amen.
I was in church all the time as a child. I grew up in the Baptist church, right? So, you're at church 7 days a week, basically. Like you're always at church. But, and it wasn't, they said and did a lot of things that I didn't agree with in the church. But at night when I would be scared is when it would be like, I'd be praying for, big angels named Bubba to come and protect me, basically. But I would know. He put it in my heart that wasn't right. Right. Yeah. I had great grandparents. My grandparents, my mom's parents were amazing people, but they didn't have a clue what was going on in the household. Like we were very isolated. We had our friends in the family, on the street and stuff like that. But he was gregarious and amazing, and he would go out and play with the kids in the neighborhood, and they had no clue, until the first day he got taken off by the police,
Yeah.
And it shocked everybody.
Sometimes that's when the neighbors are like, oh my goodness, he was such a nice man,
Yeah. Oh yes, we heard that. I heard that a lot, and I just shake my head because I knew who he was.
So I hope I mentioned that, or it was mentioned on one of the videos. Domestic violence can happen in any culture, any economic background, in any neighborhood. It's, it can happen anywhere.
Yeah, and it didn't come, my mom didn't come from a background of that, and my biological father didn't come from that background either. Neither one of their parents were like that. They weren't raised that way. They were raised very, middle, everything was great and fine, and there's no abuse. So I realize why he chose what he chose now, but I recognized it right away.
Yeah. And another point to that, when it comes to abusers, like victims, we recommend victims to go get therapy, to go get help. But what is there for the abuser? There is a domestic prevention program for batterers, and they have to go from anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks. Sometimes they get arrested, they're on probation. It's to stay away from the victim, not to get into any other crimes or commit any crimes. But they also are ordered, if it's through court, to go through a program as well, to change. And it's not so much of they're angry, it's to change their mentality that this is the way to solve my conflicts, or I'm in control, or I'm right. It's just they have to go through their therapy as well. But it's different from, what a victim will go through, okay?
And that's what I was going to ask next is, so I assume that there's some help for them as well.
Correct.
For the people that are the abusers.
Yes.
What are the statistics on that being effective?
If they stick with it. I don't have the exact stats, but I do know from working in the court system, I have seen them come back, repeated situations. It's just like the cycle. So let's say they get arrested, they have one girlfriend, or they're with the wife, they talk to the wife, sweet talk, we go through that honeymoon stage, please, don't press charges, I gotta work, I'm working for such and such company. And what does the victim do? She sometime, not all the time, but she may not press charges. She may not go forth with the case. So what happens? You go back home, but if the problem hasn't been resolved, what's going to happen? It's going to happen and repeat itself again. It could be lead up. I have seen incidents where the person has been arrested over and over. The next case may be a homicide, or the lady decides, I'm leaving, getting a divorce, move on. She's okay, but if he doesn't get help, he moves on to a new person, a new victim, and repeats the same pattern again. Sorry, yes.
The people that been abused is not because they don't want to go to tell or ask for help, or they don't see it, but sometimes they have a reason they cannot move. I didn't want to talk because I know if I talk I'm going to cry, because I've been abused myself for 30-something years. My husband brought me here to United States, born in Haiti. He was really good to me. When I came here with the kids, he didn't only abuse me, but the kids been abused because of me. He abused the kids too. But as a Christian, when you're inside the church, you have another belief. You believe that God cannot do for you. There is something that's gonna stop him. He's gonna see what he's doing is wrong, and he's gonna come to a sense to stop himself, so to come to reality that what I'm doing, it's wrong to my family. Especially that the person brought you here, and then you marry the person, and then you have kids. For me, and I have kids with them. I have a lot of kids. I have 7 kids. But the thing started after my 40, to tell you the truth, since the beginning, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't kind of abuse. It started little by little to become huge. But you in there, you living in there, you don't want your kids to go growing by another, for you to divorce your husband, so your kids, your daughter, when I first came here, and I see because I used to be big in the kids' school to go participate in everything. So because of that, and when I go to those meetings, and then I see all the cousin or the husband abuse your daughter, so I didn't want anything like that happen to my children. And then you stay because you want your kids to have a better life. You don't want your kids to don't have a father. You have your father, the father to be in with your kids. So there was many reasons to stay. You stay because you inside a church, and then you hear that God said you have to forgive. And then every time that the person did something wrong, beating you or cursing you, you get abused physical. I get abused physical. I get abused verbally. I get abused sexually as my husband. But, I take everything because I want my kids to have a better life. I don't want my kids to be, as a black person, and then you see what's going on. You want your children to stay there, to get a better life. It's not that great. When you grow, as you go, keep going, you see that it wasn't that great for the kids for you to stay. But at that moment, that's what you see. You don't want to move. And then it's when, like Pastor said, some of them is the kids that see. To tell you the truth, for me to get off my husband, to move from the house, one of my children one day get up and said, "That's enough," to my husband. They say, "Enough." And then they pack my kids, pack my stuff, and say, "We leaving." Yes, they were 15, 17 years old. They say, "We leaving." So this is how I left, because I didn't want my kids to, the little one was 15 years old. And then the older one was 20 years old, or something like that. And then so we pack, and then we go. But I always, in my mind, I always think my husband gonna see that he was wrong. He's gonna come back, and things gonna change. And the pastors, when they're preaching, I'm sorry, Pastor, but some of the pastors, not Moïse, but some of the pastors, when they're preaching, they preach, because I spend all my life with my kids in the church. All these things are going on. And I am the director of the youth, and I'm doing all those things in the church, while